"She's mine now," said the Mafia boss when her in-laws cut her hair and… On a rainy night, a young bride is dragged into a kitchen, scissors flashing, until the most feared Mafia boss steps in and says, "She's mine now." He isn't saving a stranger. He's claiming a target. And the whole neighborhood is watching. Inside his guarded world, protection feels like a cage. Until the truth leaks out. A secret ledger, dirty officials, and a video that was never about discipline. It was bait. Her husband shows up with a sorry smile and one wrong question. Where is it? A friend vanishes, a bomb vest blinks, and someone inside the boss's circle is feeding the wolves. He's lethal to everyone else, but gentle with her. She's done being anyone's property, but she might need his darkness to survive. The city locks down, sirens close in. A single whisper could start a war, or end one. If claiming her saved her life, what will keeping her cost? When every truth cuts deeper than those scissors, will mine mean protection, or a promise they both can't escape? The fluorescent kitchen lights buzzed overhead as the first chunk of Arya's dark hair hit the linoleum floor. She watched it fall through vision blurred by unshed tears, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The scissors made a harsh metallic sound with each cut, wielded by her mother-in-law's shaking hands. "This is for your own good," Margaret Rourke hissed, another snip punctuating her words. "Maybe now you'll learn to be a proper wife." Arya's father-in-law Gerald stood in the corner, arms crossed, his phone aimed steadily at her face. The red recording light blinked like an accusation. Behind him, Ethan shifted from foot to foot, eyes fixed on the floor tiles. The neighbors' walls were paper thin. Arya could hear their muffled voices, probably pressed against the shared wall of their duplex. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. "Please," she whispered, though she knew it was useless. The word tasted like defeat. More hair fell. The evening rain drummed against the kitchen window, providing a soundtrack to her shame. Margaret's amateur haircut left patches longer than others, making the whole ordeal even more degrading. "You embarrassed this family," Gerald said, his phone never wavering. "Running around town like some loose woman, meeting God knows who." Arya wanted to scream that working late at the accounting firm wasn't a crime, that the overtime was necessary for the promotion she'd been chasing. But her throat had closed up, chest tight with panic and rage. A car door slammed outside. Heavy footsteps approached the front door. The kitchen fell silent except for the rain and the scissors continued snipping. Then the door burst open with such force it rattled the dishes in their cupboards. Keir Valenti filled the doorframe, rain darkening his expensive suit. His presence seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Even Gerald lowered his phone. "Step away from her!" His voice was soft but carried the weight of absolute authority. Margaret's hands froze mid-cut. "This is a family matter." "I won't repeat myself." Keir's gaze swept the kitchen, taking in Gerald's phone, Ethan's cowardly stance, the hair scattered across the floor. His expression hardened into something dangerous. He shrugged off his long black coat and approached Arya with measured steps, as if trying not to startle her. The coat settled warm and heavy across her shoulders, smelling of rain and expensive cologne. His hands were gentle as he adjusted it to cover her properly. "She's mine now." The words rang through the kitchen like a death knell. He turned to face the others, positioning himself between Arya and her tormentors. "The cameras caught everything. Your phones, too. Evidence of assault." Ethan finally found his voice. "You can't just take my wife." "Watch me." Keir's hand settled on the small of Arya's back, steadying but not constraining. "Your wife? The one you stood by and watched being assaulted? That wife?" Arya felt the tremors in her legs subsiding, replaced by a strange calm. The coat enveloped her like armor. "Let's go," Keir said softly, for her ears only. She let him guide her past her shell-shocked in-laws, past Ethan's desperate reaching hand that fell short of touching her. The rain had intensified, drumming against the armored SUV waiting at the curb. A driver held the door open, and Keir helped her inside before sliding in next to her. The drive passed in silence. Arya watched raindrops race down the bulletproof windows, trying to process the surreal turn her evening had taken. Keir made several quiet phone calls, his voice clipped and professional as he issued orders. The SUV passed through gates into a waterfront compound, where security personnel stood alert despite the downpour. Keir led her into a marble-floored foyer where staff waited with efficient concern. "Dr. Chen will examine you in the medical suite," he told her. "Check for any injuries. Security is sweeping the perimeter. Your suite will be ready within the hour." Arya nodded, somehow managing to find her voice. Thank you. His expression softened fractionally. You're safe here. The medical examination was brief but thorough. No physical injuries beyond some small nicks from the scissors. The doctor's gentle hands and professional manner helped steady Arya's racing thoughts. Now she stood in the guest suite's elegant bathroom, staring at her reflection. The haircut was as bad as she'd feared, choppy, uneven, brutal in its execution. But her eyes were dry, her jaw set with determination. The rain continued its assault on the windows, but it felt different here, cleansing rather than oppressive. Kier's coat still draped her shoulders, its weight a reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. She touched the ragged ends of her hair, remembering the scissors bite, but the shame was being replaced by something else. Resolve. They'd tried to break her with this public humiliation, this recorded degradation. Instead, they'd given her the push she needed to finally break free. The thought crystallized with perfect clarity. She was leaving with Kier Valenti, not because he'd claimed her, not because she had no choice, but because staying meant accepting that she deserved those scissors, those filming phones, those righteously cruel hands. She didn't. She never had. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Hale, your room is ready whenever you'd like to rest. Thank you, she called back, voice stronger than she expected. She took one last look in the mirror. The woman who stared back was changed, not broken, but transformed. Like a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis, she had shed something tonight. The meek accountant who endured weekly family dinners of thinly veiled criticism, who worked overtime without complaint, who smiled through her husband's protective monitoring of her phone, that woman had died under Margaret's scissors. The rain rattled the windows, but Arya stood unmoved. She was exactly where she needed to be. The medical suite smelled of antiseptic and expensive leather. Dr. Chen dabbed at the tiny cuts along Arya's hairline with careful precision, her touch clinical but kind. The sting of alcohol made Arya wince. These are superficial, Dr. Chen said, applying small bandages. But I'm concerned about shock. Your hands are still trembling. I'm fine. Arya pulled away slightly. I need to go home. Not happening. Kier's voice came from the doorway. He carried a thick manila folder, his suit jacket now discarded, to reveal a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. You can't keep me here, Arya said, but her voice lacked conviction. Kier spread the folder's contents across the examination table. Receipt after receipt, bank statements, text messages, a paper trail that made her accountant's mind spin. Your husband's been busy. Side deals with the Moretti family, laundering money through shell companies. Your in-laws are neck-deep in it. Arya's fingers traced the familiar business names, companies she'd helped audit, numbers that hadn't quite added up. I knew something was wrong, but you're safer here. Kier gathered the papers. That display tonight wasn't just about control. They're scared, sloppy. The public claim I made keeps the wolves at bay, but it also means you need to stay under protection until this cools down. I need to call Lena. Arya wrapped her arms around herself. She'll worry. Kier considered this, then handed her a burner phone. One call, 5 minutes, Lena answered on the first ring. Arya? Oh, thank God, are you okay? That video... What video? Arya's stomach dropped. It's all over the neighborhood groups. Margaret sent it to everyone saying you'd strayed from family values or some bullshit. People are talking. The wrong people are asking questions. Arya's hands shook harder. She'd known they were filming, but the reality of that public humiliation hit like a physical blow. Kier took the phone before she could drop it. Ms. Ortiz, this is Kier Valenti. Arya's safe. I'll have someone contact you with secure communication methods. He ended the call, his expression dark. They really posted it? Arya's voice sounded distant to her own ears. I have people working to contain it. Kier pressed a button on his desk phone. Sarah, bring up the overnight bag and the hair kit. A woman arrived minutes later carrying designer shopping bags and a professional stylist case. She had the efficient bearing of security personnel despite her fashionable outfit. Sarah will help you get settled, Kier said. The suite has everything you need. Guards will be posted, but you'll have complete privacy inside. If you need anything, use the house phone, direct line to security desk. Arya nodded numbly. Sarah led her through marble hallways to a suite that could have been a luxury hotel room. Cream walls, plush carpet, sitting area with elegant furniture. The bathroom was bigger than her entire master bedroom at home. Would you like me to even out your hair? Sarah offered, setting down the styling case. I'm trained for it. Not tonight. Arya couldn't bear more hands near her head. Thank you. Sarah arranged clothes in the walk-in closet, everything in Arya's size, tags still attached. Toiletries appeared in the bathroom, high-end brands she'd only window shopped. A laptop sat on the desk, presumably monitored. The whole setup spoke of thorough preparation. The phone connects to security, Sarah demonstrated. Press 1 for immediate response, 2 for general requests. Mr. Valenti's office is 3, but he asked that you use it only for emergencies tonight. When Sarah left, Arya stood in the center of the room, suddenly lost. Kier's coat still hung heavy on her shoulders. She shrugged it off carefully, folding it over a chair by the window. The expensive wool held its shape like armor. She should shower, should change into the silk pajamas Sarah had unpacked, should do something other than stand here feeling shell-shocked. Instead, she curled up on top of the duvet, still in her clothes from the kitchen nightmare. The bed was obscenely comfortable. The sheets smelled of lavender. Every 15 minutes, footsteps passed her door, regular as a metronome, guards doing their rounds. She could hear them murmuring into radios, maintaining their vigilance. Somewhere in the compound, a clock began striking midnight. Another answered from a different wing, then another, creating an echoing chorus of chimes. Arya counted them all, using the sound to anchor herself in this surreal moment. She didn't sleep. Not really. Her body was too wired, her mind too full of scattered images. Scissors flashing, phones recording, Ethan's averted eyes, Kier's steady presence. But she drifted in and out of awareness as the night crept past. 1 o'clock brought more chimes, more guard rotations. 2 o'clock, 3, each hour marked by brass voices and measured footsteps. The rhythm should have been maddening, but instead it felt like a shield, each sound confirming that she wasn't alone, wasn't unprotected. Rain continued to fall outside her window, pattering against bullet-resistant glass. The drops caught city lights, creating abstract patterns that Arya watched with unfocused eyes. Her hair felt wrong against the pillow, too short, too jagged. Every shift reminded her of what had happened, what was still happening in group chats and whispered conversations across the neighborhood. 4 o'clock, 5. The sky began to lighten imperceptibly. Dawn was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. The coat on the chair remained a dark sentinel, its presence both comfort and reminder. Everything had changed in a few brutal hours. The guards passed again, clockwork and their dedication. Arya listened to their boots on carpet, their quiet professionalism. In her previous life, such surveillance would have felt suffocating. Now it felt like breathing room, space to process, to plan, to decide who she would be in the aftermath of scissors and shame. 6 o'clock chimed as the first real light of day crept through her windows. She hadn't slept, not truly, but she had survived. Sometimes that was enough. The first rays of dawn filtered through the ensuite's frosted windows, casting soft light across marble counters. Arya stood before the mirror, professional shears in hand. Each careful snip of the scissors felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. She'd found the hair kit Sarah left, complete with everything a stylist would need. The weight of the professional scissors balanced perfectly in her palm, so different from the kitchen shears that had torn through her hair last night. These cuts were precise, controlled, hers. Strands of dark hair fell to the counter as she worked, evening out the jagged edges into something intentional. She'd always worn her hair long, but there was something fierce about the emerging bob that curved just below her jaw. It made her eyes look bigger, her cheekbones sharper. Movement reflected in the mirror. Kier filling the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly spanning it. He'd changed into a fresh suit, dark gray this morning, but his face showed signs of a sleepless night. Arya met his gaze in the mirror, scissors steady in her hand. "I won't be defined by anyone's claim." Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "Not even yours." Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, but a complicated mix of respect and something darker. He stepped into the bathroom, maintaining careful distance. 8 years ago, I hesitated. The words seemed dragged from him. A woman under my protection needed immediate extraction. I waited 12 hours to verify the threat. His jaw clenched. She paid for my delay in ways I'll never forgive myself for. The raw edge in his voice made Arya's hands still. "Is that why you came so quickly last night?" "I don't hesitate anymore." The last word roughened with suppressed emotion. The crash downstairs shattered the moment. Glass breaking, voices shouting, radios crackling to life. Kier had his phone out before Arya could blink. "Report!" he barked. His free hand settled on Arya's shoulder, steering her away from the windows. The response came swift through the speaker. "Brick through the ground floor, study window, note attached, no penetration of the perimeter, subject already gone." The note? A pause. It reads, Deliver the girl! Kier's hand tightened briefly on Arya's shoulder before he caught himself and released her. Full lockdown. I want two-man teams on all access points, automated defenses armed, and air support on standby. Already implementing, sir. He ended the call, turning to Arya, who had backed against the counter. Are you all right? I need to leave. The words tumbled out. I can't put you at risk. No. The single word carried absolute authority. He pulled out his phone again, this time bringing up a series of photos. These cars have been circling your street since midnight. He swiped through surveillance shots of dark sedans with tinted windows. And this came an hour ago. The next image showed a text message from an unknown number. The girl for immunity, family approved, reply within 24 hours. Ethan's family is trying to... The realization hit like ice water. They're offering me up to your rivals. As a bargaining chip, Kier's voice went deadly quiet. Your husband's silence bought with your suffering. Arya gripped the counter behind her, knuckles white. The scissors lay forgotten beside her hand. Outside these walls wasn't freedom. It was a hunting ground. You can't go home today, Kier said, gentler now. Or tomorrow. Not until we shut this down. She nodded numbly. How long? Unknown, but I'm moving you closer to my personal security detail. He gestured for her to follow him. The guest wing is too exposed. The new suite connected directly to his private floor. Twice the size of the previous room, it featured a sitting area, office space, and a balcony overlooking the bay. The security presence was obvious, cameras in every corner, reinforced doors, what looked like bulletproof glass in all the windows. My rooms are through there, Kier indicated a connecting door. Locked from your side. The balcony has its own defensive measures, but the view is unobstructed. Arya walked to the glass doors, pushing them open to step onto the balcony. The morning sun turned the bay into a glittering expanse of light, beautiful and sharp as knife blades. The breeze carried salt spray and the distant sound of boats. Her hands found the railing, gripping it like an anchor. From this height, she could see the city sprawling around them, going about its normal morning routine. Traffic flowing, people walking dogs, joggers on the waterfront path, all of it suddenly feeling like a different world. She was aware of Kier behind her, giving her space while maintaining protective proximity. The scissors in the bathroom had felt like control, but this was reality. She couldn't go home, couldn't walk away, couldn't pretend this was a simple matter of waiting out a storm. The bay glittered mockingly in the strengthening sunlight. Somewhere in that city, Ethan was probably making excuses, spinning stories, maybe even believing his own lies about necessity and family loyalty. His family was counting coup with her life, treating her like a poker chip to slide across the table. The railing was cool under her palms, solid, real, like Kier's presence at her back, like the armed guards she could glimpse patrolling the grounds below, like the weight of understanding settling onto her shoulders. This wasn't just about surviving last night anymore. This was about surviving what came next. Afternoon sun slanted through Venetian blinds, casting prison bar shadows across the private club's back office. Arya sat beside Kier, her shortened hair brushing her jaw as she studied the man sweating across the desk. Jimmy Voss, fence, money launderer, and apparently terrible liar. The deposits, Kier said softly, spreading bank statements across the mahogany. Explain them. Voss tugged at his collar. Just regular business transactions, nothing special. 6 figures moving through shell companies tied to the Rourkes. Try again. Arya leaned forward, tracing a pattern in the numbers. These match the hardware store receipts, but the inventory doesn't support this volume. Kier's eyebrow lifted slightly at her observation. Voss's face went a shade paler. Smart girl, Kier murmured. Then to Voss. Who's laundering through the construction supplies? Voss stammered as Kier rose slowly from his chair. The violence, when it came, was precise. One hand gripping Voss's tie, the other flat on the desk. No wasted movement, just the quiet menace of control. The truth, Kier said. Now. Arya watched the methodical dismantling of Voss's resistance. Each lie met with increased pressure, each evasion countered with evidence. It wasn't chaos or cruelty. It was calculation. The port, Voss gasped finally. It's all going through the port. Which official? Kier's voice remained steady. Arya spotted a recurring initial in the ledgers. HG, she said. It's all over these transfers. Voss's eyes darted between them. Hargreaves, he whispered. Jeffrey Hargreaves handles the manifests. Kier released him, straightening his own cuffs. There. Was that so difficult? Arya studied the documents with renewed focus. These shipping dates correlate with spikes in the dummy accounts. They're using construction materials as cover. Very good, Kier said, genuine appreciation in his tone. He turned back to Voss. You'll provide a complete list of shell companies by morning. My accountant will verify. The drive back to the compound painted the city in sunset hues. Arya watched the streets blur past, processing what she'd witnessed. Violence as precision instrument wielded with purpose rather than passion. Ask, Kier said suddenly. What? You have questions. I see them building behind your eyes. She turned to face him. How did you know which pressure points would work? People telegraph their fears. Voss values his reputation more than his safety. Threatening exposure was more effective than threatening harm. You read him like a book. As did you with those ledgers. He glanced at her. Where did you learn to track money? I manage apartment complexes. Following paper trails is part of the job. She paused. Was that really necessary? The intimidation? Time is critical. Soft approaches take too long. His hands flexed on the steering wheel. But I never exceed what's needed. They walked the compound's corridors in companionable silence, shoulders nearly touching. The day's revelations hung between them, her analytical skills, his controlled power, their unexpected synergy. The kitchen was quiet at this hour. Staff had left covered plates, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, fresh bread. Arya picked at her food while Kier brewed tea. You're not eating, he observed, sliding a steaming cup toward her. Too wired. She wrapped her hands around the warm porcelain. It's been an intense day. Indeed. He settled across from her, his own plate largely untouched. Midnight approached, marked by the steady tick of the kitchen clock. Arya's mind raced through the day's discoveries, connecting dots. She rose suddenly, retrieving the coat she'd worn during her escape. There's something... The torn lining caught the light as she spread it on the table. Kier immediately grasped her intuition, reaching for his phone. I need lights and magnification in the kitchen, he ordered, and bring a seam ripper. You think something's hidden? He asked after ending the call. The tear isn't random. Arya traced the jagged edge. It's too neat, like someone started to open it but got interrupted. Security arrived with equipment, setting up bright work lights that turned the kitchen clinical. The seam ripper glinted as Arya carefully began separating stitches. The coat was a gift, she explained, working methodically. From Ethan's mother, just after we married. She insisted I wear it to family functions. Perfect way to plant something without raising suspicion, Kier noted. The paper rustled as Arya eased it from the lining, a thin sheet covered in cramped handwriting. Kier's eyes narrowed as he scanned the contents. Clever girl, he murmured. You've found us a key. Guards took up positions outside the kitchen as they worked, the compound settling into its nighttime routine. But in this brightly lit island, Arya and Kier bent over the table, piecing together a puzzle neither had expected to find. Tea grew cold in forgotten cups. The kitchen clock ticked toward midnight. Papers spread across the table, bank statements, ledger copies, and now this hidden message, forming a map of deception that pointed toward larger revelations. Arya felt oddly energized despite the hour. We should cross-reference these dates with the port manifests. Tomorrow, Kier said firmly. You need rest. She started to protest, but caught herself yawning. The adrenaline of discovery was fading, leaving bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. Kier began gathering the documents while maintaining their careful organization. Guards stepped forward to pack up the lighting equipment. The kitchen gradually returned to its shadowy midnight state, but the momentum of their investigation lingered in the air. The hidden ledger slid from the coat's hem like a secret exhaling. Arya's fingers trembled as she smoothed the thin pages across the kitchen table. Numbers marched in neat columns, each entry a nail in someone's coffin. Look at these initials, she said, tracing the pattern. HG appears next to port dates, and MJ signs off on judicial orders that coincide with shipment releases. Kier leaned closer, his breath warm against her shoulder. Hargreaves and Judge Malcolm Mallory, the bastards left a paper trail. Why would they keep records this detailed? Insurance. His jaw tightened. Everyone keeps leverage on everyone else. It's why your in-laws staged that public spectacle. They needed to break you to find this. The realization hit like ice water. The haircut wasn't just punishment. They thought I knew where Ethan hid it. And they needed witnesses, phones recording, maximum pressure. Kier's hand brushed her shoulder, featherlight. They miscalculated. Badly. Arya studied the neat columns of dates and dollar amounts. This is enough to destroy them all, isn't it? If we play it right, he straightened, decision made. We need to move you to the master wing, tighter security. They both knew it was more than that, but neither acknowledged the current crackling between them. The compound hummed with late-night activity as they relocated. Guards swept the corridors ahead, while staff transferred her belongings. Arya clutched the ledger, unwilling to let it leave her sight. Kier's private wing sprawled across the top floor, all dark wood and leather, windows overlooking the bay. The sitting room could have swallowed her old apartment whole. We need copy, she said, forcing herself to focus on strategy rather than the intimate space. Multiple backups. Already arranged. Kier nodded to his security chief, who wheeled in a mobile scanning station. We'll work in stages. First, duplicate everything. Then leak select information, enough to make the smaller players nervous. Hargreaves will spook easily, Arya noted, watching the pages feed through the scanner. He's a bureaucrat, not a soldier. If we show him proof we have this. He'll flip. Kier's smile held no warmth. I can arrange a meeting. Private. Persuasive. They worked methodically past 1 a.m., organizing evidence into categories. Shipping manifests, judicial orders, payment schedules. Each document added another layer to the corruption. Look at these dates, Arya said, spreading papers across the coffee table. Every major shipment required multiple signatures. They built redundancy into the system. Makes it harder to trace responsibility, Kier agreed, but also means more pressure points we can exploit. The scanner whirred steadily, creating digital copies while they planned. Staff brought fresh coffee and departed silently, leaving them alone with the evidence and the weight of what came next. We'll need to move fast once we start, Kier said, studying a particularly damning page. The moment anyone realizes what we have, they'll burn everything and run. Or come after us harder. Arya rubbed her tired eyes. How do we protect the original? Kier crossed to a cabinet and returned with a brushed metal document tube. Waterproof, fireproof, and coated lock. We'll keep it here, in plain sight. The ledger slid into the tube with a soft whisper of paper on metal. Kier sealed it with practiced movements and placed it on the mantel, centered like modern art. Arya sank onto the leather sofa, exhaustion finally catching up. The clock crept past 2 a.m. as the compound powered down for the night. Security shifts changing with quiet efficiency. Rest, Kier said, draping his coat over her before she could protest. I'll take first watch. He settled into an armchair opposite, positioning himself between her and the door. A pistol appeared on his thigh, casual as a house key. The leather sofa cradled her like a cloud. Kier's coat carried his scent, sandalwood and gun oil, danger and safety intertwined. Arya fought sleep, trying to focus on the tube containing their weapon, but her eyes grew heavy. The sitting room blurred softly around her. Through half-closed lids, she watched Kier maintain his vigil, strong hands relaxed near the weapon, gaze never wavering from her position. The weight of his attention should have made her nervous. Instead, it felt like armor. Papers rustled as the air conditioning cycled. Moonlight painted silver stripes across the floor. Arya drifted deeper into exhaustion, conscious thought fragmenting into impression. The smooth leather against her cheek, the warmth of Kier's coat, the steady rhythm of his breathing across the coffee table. Their plans hung in the air between them, solid as the metal tube on the mantel. Tomorrow they would begin dismantling an empire, using paper and ink to tear down corruption. But tonight, in this quiet hour before dawn, there was only the sofa's embrace and Kier's unwavering presence. The coffee table separated them like an ocean, deep with unspoken currents. Heat shimmed in the space between, acknowledgement hovering just below words. Neither of them reached across that divide, letting the tension build like a slow-burning fuse. Arya's last coherent thought was of the ledger, safely sealed away, their weapon, their shield, their key to justice. Then sleep claimed her fully, dragging her under while Kier maintained his watch, guardian and partner in the war to come. The room settled into pre-dawn stillness. Guards patrolled the corridors outside with measured steps. Inside, only two sounds remained. Arya's deep, even breathing and the whisper-soft slide of Kier's thumb across the pistol's grip as he kept his vigil, eyes never leaving her sleeping form. Dawn crept over the compound, painting golden stripes across the kitchen counter where Arya wrapped her hands around a steaming mug of coffee. Kier stood at the window, his own cup untouched as he scanned the perimeter with practiced eyes. First lesson, he said, turning to face her. Security starts with awareness. Watch the patterns, delivery schedules, guard rotations, civilian traffic. Arya nodded, absorbing the methodical way he broke down surveillance. He walked her through typical tail techniques. The same car, 3 turns in a row, the jogger who never sweats, the delivery van without logos. Your turn. He led her to the window. Tell me what looks wrong. She studied the street beyond the gates, applying his lessons. The blue sedan, it's been parked there too long. No one's gotten in or out. Good. Pride colored his voice. Now the next step. Personal defense. In the private shooting range beneath the compound, Keir placed a small pistol in her hands. The weight felt foreign, dangerous. He positioned himself behind her, adjusting her grip with careful touches. Thumb here, support hand underneath, always treat it as loaded. His breath brushed her ear as he guided her through the basics. This is the safety. Never pointed at anything you don't intend to shoot. After the lesson, Arya stood in his office, shoulders straight as she laid out her terms. No more public claims without asking me first. No decisions about my safety that I'm not part of making. Keir studied her from behind his desk, respect evident in his measured nod. Agreed. You're a partner in this, not a chess piece. They spent late morning crafting the perfect leak, enough information to rattle the smaller players without showing their full hand. Arya's knowledge of the accounting helped target specific weak points. Hargreaves will recognize these numbers, she said, highlighting a sequence of transactions. He'll know exactly what we have. Good. When we meet, I want him scared, but not desperate. Keir outlined the approach. We'll offer him a way out in exchange for testimony. They rehearsed the meeting repeatedly, fine-tuning their strategy as afternoon light slanted through the windows. Arya would play analyst, Keir the enforcer, roles that played to their strengths while maintaining control. The sun was setting when the first shots cracked against the outer gate. A guard dropped, red blooming across his chest. Keir moved with lethal speed, yanking Arya toward the safe room hidden behind a bookcase. She barely registered the movement as he pulled her into his lap, one arm banding around her waist while he punched in security codes with his free hand. His body caged her, solid and immovable, as gunfire echoed outside. Delta Team, sweep the north perimeter, he ordered into a comm unit. Charlie, lock down all access points. Report. Arya's heart hammered against her ribs, every sense heightened by adrenaline and the heat of his chest against her back. His grip was protective rather than possessive, but the intimacy of their position sent electricity racing along her nerves. The firefight ended as quickly as it began. When silence fell, Keir immediately loosened his hold, helping her to her feet with gentle hands. I'm sorry, he said, voice rough with emotion. I should have asked before grabbing you. Next time, I'll warn you first. The raw honesty in his apology stripped away any anger she might have felt. You were protecting me, but thank you for acknowledging it. Hours later, they sat shoulder to shoulder in the surveillance room, reviewing footage of the attack. The screens cast everything in harsh blue light, making the violence feel both immediate and distant. Arya's hand shook as she rewound the footage, watching the guard fall again. Keir covered her trembling fingers with his warm palm, steadying her grip on the controls. We'll make it right, he promised, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. Starting with Hargreaves at dawn. They sat in silence, faces illuminated by the glow of monitors, letting their joined hands say what words couldn't. Outside, the night deepened toward midnight as they prepared for tomorrow's dangerous game. The footage played on repeat, guards moving with military precision, smoke rising from the gates, their desperate run to safety. Each viewing strengthened their resolve. Someone had tried to breach their fortress, to shatter the fragile trust they'd built. Show me the angle from the east camera again, Arya said, leaning forward. Their shoulders brushed as she pointed out details. Muzzle flashes, vehicle positions, escape routes. Keir's presence anchored her as they dissected the attack from every angle. His hand remained over hers on the controls, neither of them acknowledging the contact that had nothing to do with reviewing security footage. The surveillance room hummed with electronics and unspoken tension. On screen, their earlier selves raced through the compound, his arm around her waist, her hand gripping his shirt. The moment looked different from this angle, less about control and more about desperate protection. They watched until their eyes burned, memorizing every detail that might help them survive the next attack. Tomorrow would bring its own dangers, but tonight they had this. Shared purpose, growing trust, and the warm press of hands in the blue-lit darkness. The sunrise painted golden stripes across the compound's kitchen when Keir's attorney called. Arya watched Kier's expression harden as he listened, his knuckles whitening around his coffee mug. "Your husband filed a kidnapping report," he said, after hanging up. "Claims I'm holding you against your will." Arya's laugh held no humor. "Of course he did. The in-laws put him up to it. Working with Castellano's crew, they're trying to force my hand through legal channels." Kier set his phone down carefully, too carefully. "My attorney shut it down, but they'll try again." "They want the ledger." Arya wrapped her arms around herself, remembering the weight of scissors, the flash of phones recording her shame. "Ethan knows I have it. There's a way to end this cleanly." Kier moved closer, not touching, but present. "Meet him somewhere public. Let him show his hand. If he's working both sides, he'll reveal it." "A controlled situation?" She considered it, weighing risks against closure. "My people will blanket the location. He won't be able to sneeze without us knowing." They chose a busy cafe downtown, the kind of place where business meetings happened over expensive coffee. Arya dressed carefully, tailored blazer, short hair styled with deliberate precision, armor for battle. Ethan was already seated when she arrived, looking smaller than she remembered. His earnest smile faltered when she sat down without returning it. "Arya, I've been so worried." He reached for her hand. She moved it to her lap. "What they did, what my parents did, it was wrong. I should have stopped them." "Yes, you should have." Her voice remained steady, even as old pain twisted beneath her ribs. "I'm sorry." He glanced around, then leaned forward. "But you're not safe with Valenti. Everyone knows what he is. Just tell me where the ledger is, and I'll handle everything." There it was, the real reason for his concern. Arya stood smoothing her blazer. "Thank you," she said quietly. Confusion crossed his face. "For what?" "For finally being honest about whose side you're on." She turned away from his stammered protests, walking out into the sunlight where Kier waited by the car. "He asked about the ledger?" Kier's voice was soft with contained violence. "Of course he did. That's all I am to any of them, a way to get what they want." The words tasted bitter. "I'm done begging for basic decency from men who trade in my pain." Back at the compound, they threw themselves into planning the Hargreaves meeting. Maps spread across Kier's office desk, surveillance photos, financial records. Their shoulders brushed as they leaned over documents, the contact sending sparks along Arya's skin. "If we pressure him here," she pointed to a weakness in his accounts, "he'll fold. He's too careful with his money to risk exposure." "Good instincts." Kier's approval warmed her. "We'll need—" She turned her head and found him closer than expected, their faces inches apart. The air between them crackled with possibility. Arya moved first, closing the distance. The kiss started gentle, exploring, her fingers curling into his shirt. His hands cradled her face with impossible tenderness, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. Heat bloomed slow and dangerous between them. His restraint was obvious in the tension of his shoulders, the careful way he let her control the pace. When she deepened the kiss, his groan vibrated through her bones. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads touching. "We should stop," Kier murmured, though his hands hadn't left her face. "We should," Arya agreed. The want burned in her blood, but timing mattered. They needed clear heads for tomorrow. He stepped back first, creating space they both needed. "Early start for Hargreaves?" "Early start," she nodded. "Separate rooms." "Separate rooms!" His smile held promise rather than regret. "We'll handle Hargreaves, then figure out the rest." They moved through their evening routines with heightened awareness of each other. Simple tasks felt charged, passing in hallways, reviewing final details, setting alarms for dawn. Arya stood at her window, watching fog roll in from the bay. The compound settled into night quiet, broken only by steady patrol footsteps and distant waves. Her lips still tingled from their kiss, a reminder that some choices were worth waiting for. Security lights cut silver paths through the marine layer, creating halos in the mist. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she had this: safety earned through cunning, justice within reach, and the warmth of a kiss freely given rather than claimed. She touched her fingers to the window glass, watching her reflection fade as the fog thickened. Somewhere in the darkness, Kier was also preparing for sleep, both of them choosing discipline over desire. There would be time for more. After Hargreaves, after justice, after they'd built something real from the ashes of her old life. The compound's night sounds wrapped around her like a familiar blanket, guards changing shifts, Waves breaking against the seawall, the soft hum of security systems. She'd learned their rhythms over these days of sanctuary, just as she'd learned to read Kier's subtle expressions and unspoken promises. Setting her alarm, Arya slipped under cool sheets. Tomorrow would require focus, strategy, and perfect timing. Tonight was for rest, for processing the sea change of that kiss, for letting anticipation simmer beneath conscious thought. Outside her window, the marine layer continued its slow advance, wrapping the compound in layers of protective fog. The security lights created shifting patterns as mist swirled past, nature's own surveillance system adding to their defenses. Sleep came easier than she expected, carried on the steady heartbeat of waves against the shore. The compound stood guard around her, solid and secure, while fog erased the boundaries between sea and sky. The compound's pre-dawn silence shattered when Arya burst into Kier's office, tablet in hand. Her fingers flew across the screen, pulling up security logs. "Look at these patrol records," she said, spreading timestamps across his desk. "Cameras 4 and 7 went dark 3 times this week. Same duration, same time windows." Kier leaned in, his shoulder brushing hers. 10-minute gaps, precisely timed. His jaw tightened. This isn't a glitch. They dove deeper into the logs, cross-referencing staff schedules and access codes. The pattern emerged like a shadow taking shape. All trails led to one person. "Brenner!" Kier growled, his security chief's name turning to ash in his mouth. "He's the only one with override access to those specific cameras." Arya's mind raced. The attack on the gate, he would have known exactly when to hit us. And what intel to feed outside? Kier's hands curled into fists on the desk. "We need proof." They crafted the trap carefully. False intel about moving the ledger, sprinkled with just enough truth to be believable. Brenner took the bait without hesitation, his eagerness to relay the information telling its own story. The Riverside meetup unfolded like a carefully orchestrated dance. From their surveillance position, Arya and Kier watched Brenner pace the empty dock, checking his phone repeatedly. A sleek black car pulled up precisely at noon. "Calder Voss," Kier identified the man who emerged, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Port routes aren't enough anymore. He wants you traded for full access." Arya's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "Then let's make sure he gets neither." The Hargreaves meeting proceeded as planned, though tension hummed beneath every word. In a private room at the Marriott, they laid out their evidence. One damning ledger line and a photo of Judge Mallory's signed warrant request. Hargreaves' face drained of color. "How did you—" "Doesn't matter." Kier's voice was silk over steel. "What matters is what happens next." The port official's resistance crumbled like wet paper. He agreed to wear a wire, to testify, to do whatever they needed to bring down the network that had made him wealthy and now threatened to destroy him. Evening painted the bay in flames as Arya and Kier stood at the waterfront. The day's victories felt heavy with consequence. A traitor identified, a key player flipped, justice within reach. "Your call," Kier said softly, his lips brushing the short hair at her nape. "You decide what justice looks like from here." Arya leaned back against him, letting his solid presence anchor her. "First, we deal with Brenner." The security chief's arrest was clinical, efficient. 2 of Kier's most trusted men took him to a soundproof room in the compound's secure wing. No violence, no dramatics, just the cold reality of consequences. "You could have asked for a way out," Kier told him through the observation window. "Instead, you risked her life for a payday." Brenner's silence spoke volumes. Later, after checking that Hargreaves was secured in a safe house with the wire properly placed, Arya retreated to her room. The day's events played through her mind like a film reel. Betrayal uncovered, pieces falling into place, the warm press of Kier's lips against her neck. His footsteps in the hallway were familiar now, a rhythm she'd learned to recognize. He stopped outside her door, close enough that she could hear his soft exhale. "I will never use your fear to win a point," he said, voice low and intense. "Not ever." Arya pressed her palm against the wood, feeling the vibration of his words. "I believe you," she answered quietly. "For now." The silence between them held weight, trust being built, boundaries being honored, possibilities taking shape. She could hear him shift, probably mirroring her position on the other side of the door. The compound settled around them, guards changing shifts, cameras whirring on their mounts, waves breaking against the shore. Everything was different now, yet somehow more solid. They had a mole in custody, a witness ready to talk, and a clear shot at their target. But more than that, they had choice. Every step from here would be decided together, with open eyes and mutual respect. The fear that had driven her into these walls was transforming into something else: determination, purpose, and a growing certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. Through the door, she could hear Kier's steady breathing, patient and present. He wasn't pushing for more, wasn't demanding entry or claiming space she hadn't offered, just standing guard, as he had since that first night, letting her set the pace of whatever was building between them. The night stretched out ahead, full of possibility and planning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, interrogating Brenner, coordinating with Hargreaves, tracking Voss's movements. But tonight, in this moment of quiet triumph and careful distance, they had laid the foundation for something stronger than fear or obligation. Arya's fingers traced patterns on the door, matching the rhythm of the waves outside. They were building their own justice, step by calculated step. Not through force or manipulation, but through choice and capability and the steady accumulation of truth. The short hair at her nape still tingled where he'd kissed her, a reminder that tenderness could exist alongside strength, that protection didn't have to mean possession, that sometimes the most powerful choice was simply to stay on your own terms. The afternoon sun slanted through the compound's windows, casting long shadows across the war room where Kier and Arya reviewed surveillance feeds. The quiet routine shattered when Kier's phone buzzed with an urgent message. "Boss, the safe house!" The guard's voice crackled with static and desperation. Arya's heart stopped as she registered the words that followed. Voss's men had found Lena, taken her, left behind only violence and a message carved deep into the apartment walls. "Bring the girl alone." The room tilted sideways as guilt crushed Arya's chest. "I did this," she whispered, fingers digging into the edge of the desk. "I brought her into this mess. I got her taken." Kier's face had gone deadly still, that mask of control she'd learned to read, slipping just enough to show the rage beneath. "I should have doubled the guard rotation, should have moved her after Brenner." He cut himself off, jaw clenching. The warmth they'd built over these days, the careful dance of growing trust and attraction, seemed to crumble like ash in their mouths. Grief and fury poisoned the air between them. "Let me go to them," Arya said, her voice flat. "No." The word snapped like a whip. "She's there because of me. And you'll both be dead if you walk in alone." They argued in low, intense voices while tactical teams deployed across the city. Each word carried the weight of things they'd started to feel, now twisted by fear and duty. "How am I supposed to do this?" Arya asked finally, pressing her palms against her eyes. "How do I love someone who has to become this weapon, this blade, when things go wrong?" Kier's silence stretched for several heartbeats. "I don't know how to be anything else," he admitted roughly. "Not when people He stopped, swallowed. "Not when they take what's mine to protect." The compound transformed under emergency protocols. Guards tripled at every entry point. Tactical teams moved in precise patterns through the city grid, searching block by block. Kier worked his phone until his voice turned to gravel, calling in markers and favors from every corner of his empire. Arya watched him pace, watched him coordinate with his captains, watched him transform from the man who'd kissed her neck so tenderly into something harder and colder. She understood the necessity, but it hurt to witness. Hours bled together. The sun set. Screens flickered with camera feeds and mapping data. Reports trickled in, a possible sighting here, an abandoned vehicle there, each lead dissolving into dead ends. "We'll find her," Kier said, whenever he caught Arya staring at the message photos. At that crude demand carved into plaster, his voice held absolute certainty, but his eyes showed the cost of that promise. Night deepened. The compound hummed with controlled tension. Arya retreated to her room, not to sleep, but to think. She lay in the dark, turning possibilities over in her mind, while listening to Kier's footsteps pass her door at regular intervals. The pieces assembled themselves slowly. She had a copy of the ledger, proof that could destroy everyone involved. She had access to basic tactical training now, thanks to Kier's lessons. She had the element of surprise. They'd expect her to come broken and afraid, not armed with evidence and strategy. Most importantly, she had Kier. Not as a savior this time, but as a partner. If she could just make him understand. She thought about Lena's fierce loyalty, about all the times her friend had stood beside her without question, about how Lena had helped her survive those first dark days after her marriage crumbled. Never judging, just supporting. The answer crystallized. She would trade herself for Lena, but not as a helpless sacrifice. She would go in carrying the ledger copy and wearing clothes with tracking devices sewn into the seams. She would give Kier everything he needed to find them both. It wasn't a perfect plan. So many things could go wrong. But it was better than waiting, better than letting Lena pay the price for helping her, better than watching Kier tear the city apart while time ran out. Dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of gray. Arya's mind raced through contingencies, through all the ways she needed to present this to Kier to make him understand. She wouldn't ask permission. This wasn't about permission anymore, but she needed him to see that this wasn't surrender. She traced the short ends of her hair, remembering how it felt when he'd kissed her there, how careful he'd been with her boundaries, how fiercely he protected what he considered his. She would use that now, would make him understand that protecting her meant trusting her too. The compound stirred with shift changes. Soon she would have to face him, have to lay out her desperate gambit and hope he could see past his instinct to shield her. Hope he could understand that sometimes the best protection wasn't a wall but a well-planned attack. Lena was out there somewhere, probably scared but staying strong because that's who she was. Arya owed her this chance, owed herself the opportunity to be more than just someone to be protected. She waited for the sky to lighten just a fraction more, for the perfect moment to set her plan in motion. Every second felt like betrayal, but she forced herself to be patient, to think it through, to do this right. First light crept over the bay as Arya moved through the compound's shadows. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. The burner phone felt heavy in her pocket, the ledger copy even heavier against her chest, where she'd tucked it into an inner pocket. She touched the subtle ridge in her jacket's cuff where the tracker lay hidden. She placed 2 envelopes on Kier's pillow, careful not to disturb his rare sleep. The first contained 3 words that felt like both apology and promise. Save her. Find me. The second, for his operations team, held technical details, tracking frequencies, her planned route, everything they'd need. Slipping past the night guards was easier than expected. They were watching for threats coming in, not someone going out. Within minutes, she was in a taxi, then another, following the protocol Kier himself had taught her about avoiding tails. The city woke around her as she made her way to the waterfront. Delivery trucks rumbled past. Early shift workers waited at bus stops. Normal life. Continuing while her world teetered on a knife's edge. Back at the compound, Kier jolted awake. She imagined him finding the notes, that first flash of fear turning to calculated rage. She didn't have to imagine what came next. She heard it through her burner phone. His voice cut through every rival syndicate's communication network. Touch one hair on her head and your family's mourn by morning. The threat carried weight not just in its words, but in the absolute certainty behind them. Reports filtered through the underground channels, ports locked down, gatekeepers paid triple their usual rates to close escape routes, tactical teams deploying to strategic points around the city. Kier was turning the city into a cage, ensuring no one could slip away with her. The warehouse district emerged from the morning fog like a graveyard of rust and concrete. Arya checked the address again, though she'd memorized it. The building stood apart from its neighbors, 3 stories of broken windows and fading paint. Her phone buzzed with messages, some from Kier, others from his captains. She didn't read them. Reading meant hesitating, and hesitation meant death. Instead, she thought of Lena, of friendship and loyalty, of debts that demanded payment. The warehouse door creaked open at her touch. Dust motes danced in shafts of light from high windows. The space felt vast and empty until she saw them. Lena tied to a chair, wires trailing from her to what could only be explosives, and 3 men watching Arya's entrance with varying expressions of triumph. Voss stood closest to Lena, his hand resting casually on the detonator. He had the sleek, well-fed look of someone who ordered violence rather than committed it. Beside him, Ethan shifted nervously, unable to meet Arya's eyes, and slightly apart stood a man she recognized from surveillance photos as Hargreaves' handler, his face a mask of professional detachment. Arya, Lena's voice cracked. Don't. Quiet, Voss snapped, then smiled at Arya. Right on time. And I trust you brought what we discussed? Arya pulled out the ledger copy slowly. Let me check her first. You're not in a position to make demands. I'm in exactly the position to make demands, Arya countered, keeping her voice level. You want me? Fine. But I see those wires are real first, or I burn this right now. Voss considered, then nodded. Arya approached Lena carefully, her training from Kier running through her head. The explosives were real, the wiring crude but effective. She squeezed Lena's hand once, trying to convey everything she couldn't say. Satisfied? Voss asked. Then let's discuss terms. You come with us, that stays here. He nodded at the ledger. And your friend lives to see another sunset. Those aren't terms, Arya said. That's a death sentence with extra steps. Call it what you want, clock's ticking. A subtle change in air pressure made Arya's ears pop. Something was happening outside. Movements, on the roof, shadows passing high windows. She kept her face neutral, but her pulse quickened. You really think he'll let you leave the city? She asked, playing for time. You heard his message? Keir Valenti isn't God, Voss sneered. He's just a man with an inflated sense of... The first police siren wailed in the distance, then another, and another, a cascade of sound that grew closer by the second. Ethan went pale. You said you had the police handled... Shut up, Voss snarled, but his hand tightened on the detonator. More movement now, definite shapes on neighboring rooftops, the glint of tactical gear in sunlight. Arya saw the moment Voss registered their situation, saw fury replace confidence in his eyes. The warehouse door burst open. Keir stood framed in the threshold, sunlight catching the edges of his suit like armor. But it wasn't his dramatic entrance that made Voss step back. It was his smile, cold, precise, promising violence with surgical accuracy. Behind him, official-looking vehicles screeched to a halt. Uniformed officers poured out, brandishing a warrant that could only have come from Judge Mallory himself. Keir's private army took up positions on every rooftop, every corner. The trap had sprung perfectly. Law enforcement on one side, Keir's crews on the other, and no way out that didn't end in handcuffs or body bags. Arya saw the future collapse into a single point of perfect clarity. This warehouse would become a tomb or a prison, depending on what happened in the next few heartbeats. Keir's smile never wavered as he stepped inside, each movement measured and deadly. His eyes found Arya first, checked her for injury, then locked onto the detonator in Voss's increasingly unsteady hand. The warehouse air crackled with tension as Keir stepped forward, the real ledger held like a weapon. Behind him, Judge Mallory's signature glinted fresh on warrants that would tear Voss's empire apart. Squad cars screamed into position, their red and blue lights painting the concrete in emergency colors. Last chance, Keir said, his voice carrying to every corner. Surrender now, and maybe your families see you before you're old men. Voss's face twisted as he watched his escape routes vanish. Through the broken windows, tactical teams moved like shadows across neighboring rooftops. The handler's hand crept toward his waistband. Don't, Arya warned, but Ethan was already moving. He lunged for her with desperate hands, thinking her the softer target. Arya remembered Keir's lessons. Weight centered, elbow tucked, palm heel straight up. The crack of Ethan's nose breaking echoed off the walls. He stumbled back, blood streaming between his fingers. The first shot came from the handler, a wild thing that caught Keir high in the shoulder. He rocked with the impact but didn't fall, muscles locked against the pain as he steadied his weapon. Blood darkened his suit jacket, but his aim never wavered. Arya, Lena's whisper drew her. Attention to the bomb vest. There's a card. Heart thundering, Arya found the instruction card taped inside the seam. The wiring was basic, designed more for fear than efficiency. Her fingers trembled, but her voice stayed steady as she read each step. Red wire connects to the power source, she murmured. Separate from the black line first. The handler went down under converging shouts. Police from the front, Keir's men from behind. He disappeared beneath a wave of tactical gear and cuffs. Voss tried to run. He made it 3 steps before they caught him, driving him to his knees as metal clinked around his wrists. His carefully maintained composure shattered into curses and threats that no one bothered to acknowledge. Last wire, Arya breathed, sweat sliding down her spine. The vest fell away and Lena sobbed, slumping forward in the chair. Ethan howled from his corner, hands still cupped around his ruined nose. Blood dripped between his fingers onto his expensive shoes. No one moved to help him. Keir swayed slightly, and Arya was there, pressing her hands against his shoulder. His blood was hot and slick between her fingers. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Recognition, relief, 1,000 words they didn't need to say. Medics flooded in with their efficient movements and crisp commands. Lena wrapped her arms around Arya's neck, tears soaking into her collar. Outside, sirens continued their urgent conversation, while the sharp smell of gunpowder dissipated on the salt-laden breeze. Status? Keir asked one of his captains, refusing to sit, despite the medic's insistence. Building secured. We have the handler's phone and laptop. Judge Mallory's already signing additional warrants based on the ledger evidence. And Hargreaves? Singing like a bird in protective custody. His testimony alone will bury half their operation. Arya kept pressure on Keir's wound, while activity swirled around them. Evidence teams tagged and bagged, officers read rights, medics triaged. The warehouse that had been meant as a trap transformed into a processing center for the fall of an empire. "You shouldn't have come alone," Kier murmured, for her ears only. "You shouldn't have taken so long to follow," she countered. His laugh turned into a wince. "Had to make sure the warrants were solid, couldn't risk them walking on technicalities." Another medic approached with a trauma kit. Arya started to step back, but Kier caught her wrist, keeping her close. His blood had dried tacky on her hands, marking them both. "The tracker in your cuff," he said. "That was smart. I learned from the best." Lena hadn't let go of Arya's other hand, her grip fierce and grateful. Together they watched as Voss was let out, his expensive suit dusty from the concrete. The handler followed, silent and gray-faced. Ethan came last, stumbling between two officers, his complaints falling on deaf ears. Through the loading bay doors, dawn had brightened into full morning. Container cranes stood like silent sentinels against the sky. Boats moved through the harbor, unaware that the balance of power on their docks had just shifted seismically. "Ma'am?" A detective approached Lena. "We'll need your statement when you're ready." Lena nodded, but didn't release Arya's hand. 5 minutes? The detective's eyes softened. "Take 10. We'll be here." More medics swarmed Kier, insistent this time about treating his shoulder. He allowed it only because it didn't require letting go of Arya. His fingers stayed wrapped around her wrist, thumb pressing against her pulse point as if reassuring himself she was real. Evidence techs photographed the bomb vest, the blood spatter from Ethan's nose, the spent shell casing from the handler's wild shot. The warehouse air slowly cleared of cordite, replaced by the antiseptic smell of medical supplies and the coffee scent drifting from the detective's paper cups. "You broke his nose perfectly," Kier commented, watching the medic clean his wound. "You're a good teacher." Arya flexed her hand, remembering the impact. "I'm an excellent teacher, but you're a natural." Lena gave a watery laugh. "You two are ridiculous." Maybe they were. But they were alive, together, and their enemies were in handcuffs. The ledger that had started everything sat in an evidence bag, its secrets about to demolish a corrupt system. Sometimes ridiculous was exactly right. Another wave of sirens approached. More detectives, probably, or possibly the media getting wind of the story. The warehouse hummed with activity, but in their small circle, time seemed to slow. Kier's blood was drying on Arya's hands, Lena's tears were damp on her neck, and the morning light streamed through broken windows like a promise of clearer days ahead. The fluorescent hospital lights buzzed overhead as nurses tried to convince Kier to accept anesthesia. He sat shirtless on the exam table, jaw clenched against pain, refusing to lie back. "Not until I see her," he repeated, eyes fixed on the door. Arya appeared moments later, clean clothes replacing her blood-stained ones. "I'm here, I'm safe, now let them work." His shoulders relaxed fractionally. The nurse moved in with the anesthetic, but Kier caught Arya's hand first. "Stay?" She nodded, settling into a chair beside him. As the drugs took hold, his grip loosened but didn't break. The bullet had gone clean through, missing major arteries. The surgeon was efficient, closing the wound while Arya watched news alerts flash across her phone. A video was spreading, not of today's warehouse standoff, but of that first night in her kitchen. The hidden camera footage showed everything. Her mother-in-law's practiced cruelty with the scissors, Ethan's calculated passivity, the moment Kier arrived, like winter's judgment. Comments flooded social media. People who'd shared the original haircut video now deleted their posts, horrified to learn they'd been weaponizing her trauma to help criminals hunt her. The truth emerged in waves, how the in-laws had orchestrated the public humiliation to force her to reveal the ledger's location, how they'd sold the footage to create a smokescreen of scandal while they searched her house. "Your shoulder will need immobilization for at least 2 weeks, the doctor was saying to Kier. "No sudden movements, no—" "I know the drill," Kier interrupted, already pushing himself upright, despite the fresh stitches. Arya steadied him as he stood. By afternoon, Judge Mallory's indictment hit the news. The ledger had done its work, connecting money trails to sealed court orders that should never have been granted. Hargreaves was in protective custody, naming names and dates with desperate precision. Asset seizure teams descended on properties across the city. Bank accounts froze. Shell companies collapsed. The conspiracy that had hunted Arya was being dismantled piece by piece. They returned to the compound at sunset. Security was triple-layered now. Kier had replaced every guard who'd ever reported to Brenner. The familiar walls felt different, safer somehow. In the kitchen, Arya made tea while Kier checked in with his teams. When he finished, they sat at the counter where they'd first examined the ledger together. The emergency's roar had finally faded enough for real conversation. "We need to talk about consent," Arya said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Not just physical, all of it." Keir set his phone face down, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening." "That first night, claiming me publicly without asking. I understand why you did it. But consent isn't a box you tick once and move on. It's a language we have to speak every day." "Tell me how to speak it better," he said quietly. "No more decisions about my safety without me in the room. No more protective gestures I haven't agreed to. I need to be your partner, not your ward." He nodded slowly. "It will be the only language I use with you, I swear it." They spent hours at that counter, planning layers of protection that wouldn't become cages, legal firewalls to prevent future manipulation of the courts, safe houses with multiple exit routes, a foundation to help other women find escape paths from dangerous situations. "Lena could run it," Arya suggested. "She understands what it means to need a way out. We'll need trustees we can trust and security protocols for the intake process. Already working on it." She pulled out a notebook filled with flowcharts and contingency plans. "See, I can be strategic too." His smile was soft. "You've always been strategic. I just had to learn to see it." The compound's night shift changed guards as they worked. Lena slept deeply in a guest suite, monitored by Keir's most trusted team. She'd given her statement to police, then crashed for 14 hours straight. City news feeds shifted from scandal to substance. Headlines that had screamed about Arya's haircut now detailed corruption investigations. Reporters who chased gossip were following money trails instead. Near dawn, they moved to the master suite. Keir's pain medication was wearing off, but he refused to take more until they finished reviewing security protocols. "The meds will help you heal faster," Arya pointed out. "One more page," he insisted. Though his shoulder was clearly throbbing, she took the papers from his hands. "Sleep. We'll finish tomorrow." He settled into the oversized chair instead of the bed, unwilling to let her out of his sight. She curled up on top of the covers, close enough to touch if either reached out. The city was waking up beyond the windows. Container ships sounded their horns in the harbor. Early traffic hummed on distant bridges. But in the master suite, peace finally settled as Keir allowed the pain medication to pull him under, knowing Arya was safe and sleeping an arm's length away. His breathing deepened as the drugs took hold. Arya watched him drift off, noting how his face softened in sleep. The dangerous man who'd walked into her kitchen that first night was still there, but now she knew the careful man beneath the blade. Dawn painted the walls in gentle gold. On the bedside table, their phones were silent for the first time in days. The ledger that had started everything was sealed in an evidence locker downtown. Its work was done. Outside, a new shift of guards took their positions. Inside, two people who'd found each other in crisis learned to trust the quiet. Keir's wounded shoulder would heal. Arya's shortened hair would grow. But the partnership they'd forged in fire was already strong enough to build on. The morning light touched Keir's sleeping face, caught the silver threads in his dark hair. Arya's eyes grew heavy as she watched him rest. They were safe. They were together. For now, that was enough. 2 weeks after the warehouse standoff, autumn settled over the city. Arya sat in the back of the courthouse, watching Mallory's arraignment through narrowed eyes. Keir's hand rested on her knee, steady and grounding. The judge denied bail. As guards led Mallory away, his polished facade finally cracked. He looked old, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and chain restraints. "One down," Keir murmured. "3 to go," Arya finished. They'd developed a rhythm in the 14 days since the rescue. Mornings meant reviewing security reports over coffee. Afternoons were split between court appearances and planning sessions for the women's shelter program. Evenings belonged to them alone, no phones or interruptions allowed. Keir's shoulder was healing well, though he still favored it slightly. The scar would remain, but he wore it like a medal. "Worth it," he'd say, whenever Arya's fingers traced the mark. Her hair had grown enough to style properly. She kept it cropped close, each trim a choice rather than a wound. The neighborhood whispers had died down, replaced by news coverage of the corruption scandal. Several women had come forward with similar stories of intimidation and exploitation. Lena threw herself into developing the intake program. She'd hired counselors, set up encrypted communication channels, and created a network of safe houses across 3 states. The seized assets from Mallory's accounts funded everything. Poetic justice that made Arya smile. Hargreaves took a plea deal in exchange for testimony. His handler faced multiple life sentences. Ethan's accessory charges stuck after security footage showed him coordinating with Voss's crew. "Ready?" Keir asked as they left the courthouse. Arya nodded. They had wedding plans to finalize. The ceremony would be small, just 20 guests on the compound's waterfront terrace. Triple security layers, background checks on every vendor, and armed teams on adjacent rooftops. Arya had approved each measure personally. That evening, she stood in their closet, touching the simple white dress she'd chosen. No veil, no train, nothing that could be grabbed or used against her. Just clean lines and careful tailoring, like armor made of silk. Having second thoughts, Keir appeared in the doorway. "No," she turned to face him. "Just thinking about how far we've come." He crossed to her, movements careful around her space, a language they'd both learned to speak. "We built this together, equal partners." "Partners who keep each other human," she agreed. The next day brought Voss's preliminary hearing. Arya testified about the warehouse, voice steady as she detailed the explosives vest and Lena's terror. Keir's jaw tightened at the memories, but he let her tell it her way. Between court dates, they reviewed shelter intake procedures. Lena had already placed 3 women in emergency housing, with more reaching out daily. Each success felt like reclaiming ground from the people who'd tried to break them. "We need a bigger support staff," Lena reported, spreading paperwork across Keir's office desk. "And maybe a dedicated medical team." "Done," he said. "Whatever you need." Arya smiled, watching them work. Lena had stopped flinching at sudden movements. The nightmares came less frequently. Healing happened in layers. Security rotations shifted as sunset painted the bay in amber and rose. Guards who'd proven loyal during the crisis earned promotions. Those with questionable records were quietly dismissed. In their private moments, Keir and Arya planned their future. He modified business practices to create legitimate revenue streams. She developed protocols to protect vulnerable people without compromising operational security. "Balance," she'd remind him when old instincts surfaced. "We can be both safe and ethical." "You make me want to be better," he'd answer. The night before their wedding, they stood on their terrace watching boats move through the harbor. Arya wore his suit jacket against the chill, sleeves rolled up to free her hands. "Tell me your vows," she said softly. He turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders. "I promise to be lethal to anyone who threatens you, and tender only to you. To make your safety my first priority without caging your spirit. To build something lasting outside the old rules of blood and money. My turn." She rested her palms against his chest. "I promise to be your compass and your challenge. To face our battles beside you, not behind you. To choose you every day, knowing exactly who you are." Security lights swept the perimeter in steady patterns. Inside the compound, final wedding preparations continued. Lena supervised flower deliveries, while tactical teams verified vendor credentials. Arya touched her short hair, remembering the kitchen where everything began. The wound had become a crown, the trauma transformed into purpose. Each decision since that night had led them here. "Last chance to elope," Keir teased. "Not a chance." She leaned into him. "We're doing this properly, with witnesses and paperwork and every legal protection available. Always strategic. Always careful," she corrected. "We've earned this future. I want it documented." Tomorrow, they would exchange rings and promises under the same sky that had watched their first meeting. Their world had expanded beyond survival into something sustainable. Protection without possession, strength without cruelty. But tonight was for quiet anticipation, for standing together as equals while the city glittered below and the bay rolled steady beyond their walls, for knowing they'd chosen this path with clear eyes and full hearts.